well, we have a lot to talk about today. So we will start digging into the conversation. And before I introduce the panel, I just want to say that this conversation is meant to give everyone ideas and strategies for how to be handling their sets right now in the time of COVID. By no means are we saying that we have the answers to everything, but we do want to share some stories today and share some strategies and give everyone some insight into how they may navigate the current surge that is happening. So I'm really excited to have this panel with us here today. First, we have Emilie Pitts, who is an attorney, creative counsel for creative people, and she's joining us from New York. Arielle Viny, who is the owner and executive producer of Air Productions. Louise Feldman, who is the owner and executive producer for Proof Films. Peter Maxwell from Estée Lauder, senior producer. And Dawn Kleidon from FCB Health, senior vice president and executive art producer, as well as my fabulous colleague from the AMA, Heather Elder, owner of Heather Elder Represents. So, like I said, lots to chat about today. Heather, do you want to kick us off with kind of the first questions?
Yeah, sure. I think I kind of want to start though, and just kind of say something. Here we are 2 years into this pandemic, and we're still navigating uncertainty and changing rules. And I'm thinking back to when all of this first started, and I'm remembering how everyone rallied together and created protocols and agreements, and it really made us all possible to get back on set. So as I'm sitting here today and I'm remembering being on these webinars, months ago, and I'm feeling so proud once again for our community, and knowing that conversations like these are the ones that help our industry continue to move forward. So I want to thank the panelists, the members, everybody who's attending today, because we're all willing to have those hard conversations, and it feels good to know that we're not right back where we were. We're just in a little blip, and we're here to kind of figure out what's coming next for us. So thank you everyone for being part of it. And I think starting off, the first question is a pretty obvious one. It's, have you seen an increase in positive tests? Arielle, why don't we start with you?
I think a lot of us are navigating in real time what's going on with all the positive tests and how it's affecting all of our shoots. I think everybody on here was just talking about that earlier. Yes, so the answer is yes. We have seen an increase in positive tests. Luckily, I in my experience thus far, I haven't had too many positive tests literally until this month, where it's been affecting us. But yeah, there has been recently an increase. Luckily, most of the people that have COVID right now are asymptomatic. So that's been good at least.
Has anybody not seen a positive, have not had an increase in positive tests?
I'm going to launch a poll to the audience members as well, just to see how everyone else has been feeling. I know that across my organization, it's been a dramatic uptick since 2020. Up until December, for the last 2 years, we only had to shut down 1 photo shoot. And then in December, we had to shut down 7. It was crazy.
December was a big spike for us as well.
It was.
Thankfully, we had the holidays to kind of mellow out a little bit. So we're starting shooting up again soon. So we'll see what happens.
Did you wait a couple weeks, Peter, before you guys started shooting in January, anticipating the surge after the new year?
It happened pretty naturally based on people being ready to shoot after coming back. I definitely pushed about another week than I normally would have to see how things are landing.
Dawn, when you slid into the panel and logged on with us, you were saying how you just had to move a whole shoot. And maybe tell us a little bit about what your beginning of your year is like, because I have a feeling it wasn't just that one shoot that you've been dealing with.
Yeah, I think it's like everyone is saying, there is an uptick naturally and all across our industry, schools, the hospitals are all upticking. But so we had to move. I think when there's people that are irreplaceable in a shoot, naturally we have to move it. I think a lot of people are watching hospital rates and, if you're shooting in California, they're watching how California is doing, but we were more or less affected because we couldn't shoot without certain people, like, heroes, or if your director gets it and you want to wait for your director. But we naturally had to move it because the person was irreplaceable. So it was less about the surge, because I think, if art department gets it, or a PA gets it, or even if I get it, I have a proxy on my team, or a producer gets it. Like everyone I think right now is assuming that they have a proxy. And if that proxy gets it, then, you have to deal with it. But I think people that are irreplaceable, you have to move a shoot. And that's a client's decision, right? I mean, we can approach them and we can come up with solutions, but essentially we had to move our entire shoot back 10 days past the positive PCR. And then hope, and then you move it, and then you're hoping that the person doesn't develop symptoms, right? So every day you're checking with these people to make sure they're not symptomatic. And even just watching in my own kids, like, you can have symptoms and go away for a couple of days, and then you have just like a sore throat, and everyone's like, is it COVID? Is it not COVID? So I think the ebbs and flows of this have been, I'm sure everyone will agree. I mean, we've all losing sleep. We've become, I think, Arielle said, we're now doctors and lawyers and professionals, and people call us and they're saying, well, what if it's 5 days? Can we change now to the CDC rule? And I think we're all just trying to follow as best we can. But I think that irreplaceable people, you move the shoot, and I think everything else, I think people are trying to forge through. Because again, in every state, the surges are different. If you look across the United States map, right, it's really high in some places and low in some places. Then 3 days later, it's like higher in those places. So I hope that answers the question, but
yeah. And we're going to get into the minutia of kind of the financial responsibility of all of this later on. But has your experience been, positive is probably not the right word, but, having to move a shoot and having to cancel and postpone, it's complicated. Do you feel like you had good agreements in place beforehand to make that happen, or have you been kind of trying to wing it along the way?
I think we have good addendums in place, and we have good protocols. Everyone's had to come up with different processes and legal agreements with clients and agencies, and who takes responsibility and who pays. But I think we're winging a lot of it. Again, because of symptoms, because this week, everybody managed to stay negative, from this group. But now we have 2 more weeks to go. So now what if those people become, I have a bunch of kids going to school, I could become positive. So I think a lot of it is still pivoting, right? In the moment, like every single day. Like we just had my amazing producer on this just sent a FedEx, PCR test, because you can't even get PCR tests now anywhere. Like I'm booking, 3 weeks out to get a PCR test for next week. So is a lot of pivoting, a lot of moving parts to this.
That kind of brings us to the next section, and again, just telling everyone, we are going to talk about the financial responsibility parts of this later on. We're getting down to it because I know how those are big questions for everyone. But Kelly, do you want to kind of take over the testing question?
Yeah, sure. You know what, I'll kick it over to you, Louise. How have you changed any of your testing requirements from last year to this year?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, when we started, we would do advanced PCR tests. We've always done that. And I guess we were lucky because our clients have been pretty understanding about that. Even when there was initial pushback from them, we were able to continue to make that happen. Now, in addition to the PCR tests, we're also doing daily rapids and trying to explain that it's just one more hurdle because it's expensive, and it's like, well, we'd rather do the daily PCR tests, but okay, we'll do the daily antigen tests, not quite as sensitive, or so the New York Times tells me. I mean, that's the other thing, is like, where are we getting our information? I literally changed testing on a shoot, very small shoot, last week from rapid antigen tests to rapid PCR tests based upon an article that I read. I mean, that's kind of crazy. The client went along with it. They want to do the right thing, and they were able to do it. But it's just, it's each day, I have to say, we do a lot of winging it.
Yeah, I think we're all trying to figure out the best places for information, and guidance from friends who are doctors as well. I know, Peter, I don't know if your internet connection went out. Estée has some really amazing testing regulations, and so I'd love for everyone to hear about what your company has been doing, because I know from my experience, you guys have been leaders in this front.
We have some pretty stringent testing policies in place and have since the very beginning. After vaccines came out, they kind of lessened a little bit, but we now with Omicron are kind of ramping it back up to where it was. We do PCR testing within 2 to 3 days ahead of the shoot. And then we also do daily rapid testing to try and catch any sort of incubation period and kind of everything that can happen. It's definitely a lot and difficult to organize for everyone, and people are surprisingly resistant to some of it, which especially the early testing. But we do everything we can. We send people to people's houses to do it. And we've been very on top of kind of getting it done no matter what the cost is, which it has been high.
That's really commendable. I don't feel as though all of my direct to brand clients do that. So I think it's pretty amazing, because like you said, it's a lot of logistics and it's a big cost. Dawn, are you finding that when you present these new costs to clients that they're willing to pay for them?
Yeah, I think ours are even a step further. We have to PCR before we fly. You have to land a PCR before you tech scout. So there has to be a day. We're rapid PCRing on set. And if you're zone A, which is closest to the client, you're basically testing a PCR. There's nurses on set testing us every single day. So I'm zone A, I'm closest to the talent, that they're unmasked. Even when it wasn't Omicron, last month I tested every single day. I went to set, a nurse test me. So it's intense, and it's beyond expensive. It is insane. I'm piggybacking on shoots that have TVC, and it's hundreds of it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it really is depending on the budget, right? I mean, smaller clients that are spending say 50 grand on a shoot to come back to them and say, well, rapid testing and PCR testing is $10,000. It's like the cost is crazy. I've been very lucky. Clients are really, it's healthcare for me. That's all I work on, right? You can't go to a shoot for a healthcare advertising agency and be like, COVID broke out. That would just be disastrous. So I've been fortunate, but the rules are nuts. To get tested every single day, and for me to even find a test now to go PCR test before I get on a plane to get the results now, the labs are so backed up. I didn't get results for 7 days. 2 of my results didn't come for 7 days. I wouldn't have even been able to fly. They don't really, let rapids go at FCB. We have to PCR test for everything, and if you can't find a PCR test, then we have somebody come, like Peter was just saying, we concierge it. It's pretty intense, and it's very expensive.
Arielle, I'll ask you this. Are crew asking, because there's a question in the chat about this, are they asking to be paid a fee for their time to go test?
Hi, Walker. They are periodically. I feel like initially when testing started, which I think like August of 2020 was kind of when like testing became a thing, which we were doing shoots at the beginning of COVID, like May, June, July, and there was no testing. It wasn't a thing. It was like you had to get a doctor's note to even get a COVID test, which is crazy that we were doing shoots without testing at the beginning. And I think when AICP came out with, I think it was like $150 stipend to pay people to go get a test prior, it kind of became a thing on some of the shoots. In my experience, clients won't pay for that. It becomes a really big expense to pay people not only to go get tested, but also for their actual PCR test. I also think now, since it is kind of the norm for everybody to get tested, oftentimes people are getting tested enough that their PCR test for one shoot will also be within the same time frame for them to be on another shoot. So it hasn't really been a thing, but we do get that question periodically.
It's the same with you, Louise. I see you're nodding your head as well.
It's the same, actually. We were talking about this morning over coffee. It's like, it's not as often as it used to be that people ask to be paid. And I think it's a combination of things. We always set up for concierge testing, of course, for like, clients and whoever needs it, talent. But we use private testing services and we send everybody to them. I'm sure, Arielle, you probably do that too. But what we found is in the cases where people ask to have a stipend paid, it's very often because they're either in an inconvenient place or they're just working all the time and they don't have time. And I can appreciate that. Everybody's busy and everybody needs to keep working. So it's both worth spending the money to send a concierge to whatever that set is that they're on. And it also isn't like setting up a whole precedent for everyone that they should get paid a stipend. It also, to me, like kind of brings to mind, like, if we're all in this together, should the crew expect to get paid to test? And I really don't know. I could go back and forth on that all day long. You know, I don't know.
Emilie, is there any legal employment rules around that if you're requiring somebody to test, you have to pay them for their time? Is there any guidance there? Is that fuzzy?
So there are employment rules, but I would say that it's different for when you're hiring somebody for a shoot, but for your employees, if you do require them to get tested, you do have to pay them for their time to go get tested. Something I may be a good place to introduce here, because we're talking a lot about testing, but what we haven't mentioned is vaccinations. And something that we should all know is that we do, as a company, as either direct, brand producers or production company, or even a solo photo studio, can require everybody to be vaccinated. This is legal. There are protections for this that go back all the way to the chicken pox. Actually, is there not chicken pox, smallpox vaccines, where those were required. So there's a lot of protections there that also help, obviously, with the protection of spreading of COVID, and that I would recommend, since you do have a lot of legal protections there. That adds another layer of protection. Of course, now with all the breakthroughs, it people are still getting COVID, but that being said, we have an additional way to kind of prevent major and cases of COVID by requiring vaccinations. Now, when it comes to paying people to go get tested, I think that just like anything else, you can make the argument both ways. I mean, you're asking them to do something, just like if you're asking for a DIT to drop a hard drive in the mail the next day, they get a day rate. Like, they have to get a day rate for anything you ask them to do. It's probably less expensive to just get a concierge service. And thankfully, a lot of us are in major cities to where those are readily available to us. And so I'd recommend that, so we can avoid the conversation completely of having to pay them a day rate. But I don't think that there's any kind of legal requirement to pay a crew member besides customary practice, but there is with regards to employees.
A question to, shoot, I turned off my notifications, but it doesn't seem to work. I'll ask this to Peter and then to Don. Are you guys requiring artists to be vaccinated or having that conversation up front?
At this point, we are not having that conversation, and we kind of haven't been able to. It's a big topic of discussion amongst me and my colleagues right now as our way forward there. Estée Lauder itself, for all internal employees, just mandated that to go back, they have to be vaccinated and show proof of vaccination, which has been a great big step forward. So we're still figuring that out and trying to find the best way to do all of that, unfortunately. So I'd love to hear how anyone else is handling that situation.
Yeah, I think on our end, we cannot ask people. It's a violation for us to say, are you vaccinated, or email, but we hire producers and union crews that are able to ask that. And like Emilie said, like, she's able to, she can ask and legally to protect that, make sure, like, people can say to us, just so you know, my whole crew is vaccinated, I'm boosted. This last shoot, we did ask everyone internally if they were boosted. That was really important. And again, even like everyone is saying, there were breakthroughs even from boosted people. So we're doing everything.
What about asking clients?
Yeah.
I would just want to clarify something quickly, because you mentioned, I mean, you do, internal policies, of course, are completely different, but legally you do have the right to ask people if they're vaccinated, in the same way that a restaurant can ask you if you're vaccinated before you enter. But you cannot ask them why they are not vaccinated.
Mm.
So I just want to clarify that you can absolutely ask people if they're vaccinated, and you should.
That's great. I mean, we've found ways, like we use, like you said, we use vendors who can ask, and we always know one way or another. But it's been tricky dancing around and like the politics of it.
Mm-hmm.
To answer the question that somebody asked, if they refuse to answer, can you legally remove them from the shoot or a restaurant? Yes. There's a lot of protections that the law affords employers or any kind of, contractor that is hiring another contractor. So even within the crew that's being paid by the artist, there's a lot of protections afforded to those people. Unfortunately, less protections afforded to the people who are independent and choose not to get vaccinated. But the law is set up to protect you, and you can remove somebody if somebody refuses. You can just say everybody has to have the vaccination in order to do something. Of course, this is your internal policy to choose whether you want to do that or not. But to answer your question, yes. So if somebody doesn't comply with that, you can tell them that they can't participate. You cannot ask why, or ask for some sort of, like, a lot of times if you ask for proof of why they don't have it, that can be interpreted by the law as asking why. So if you have to require some sort of exemption, that even though you think you're doing, some sort of protective measure, it's better that you just don't. Yes or no kind of a thing.
The other thing that came up for me when like the vaccinations all kind of started was you actually can't release anybody's vaccination status. So if somebody's like, oh, is the photo assistant vaccinated? You can't tell anybody who's vaccinated and who's not.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. It's all very, very confidential. So when you file and save people's vaccination information, which you can do in order to show that you took reasonable measures to make sure that it was a safe set, for example, everything has to be very confidential and you can't share that. Thank you.
Okay, so let's say we have a set and we're producing and we're all getting tested. What happens when someone tests positive before a shoot, right? What's the expectation? What are your plans? And what happens if they test positive on the day of the shoot? Louise, you want to start with you?
Sure. Well, if it's a PCR, advanced PCR, which we always do, then we, depending upon what that role is, they're either replaced and paid for that shoot day, or we carry on without them. And the same thing, but typically we would be able to replace because we've got 12 hours or so to figure that out. We had a situation where, say, it was a set designer on a multi-day job. They tested positive, and their lead person was able to carry on with that team without them. They worked from home, and the shoot went on, and it was all fine. If somebody tests day of and a rapid, test them again, and if it's negative, then you kind of powwow, I guess, and decide. I haven't had that happen. So I'm just telling you now what I think we would do.
Would you ever retest the person to make sure it wasn't a, false positive? And
yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if it was day of, you can do multiple rapids, and then it's like, okay, well, 2 out of 3 were
Right.
negative, so we're going to move forward. But honestly, as I say, I haven't had that happen.
And how are you who here is budgeting for backups? Maybe Dawn and Peter, this might be a question for you guys. Are you asking your teams to have backups in the wings ready to go? Because, crew is hard to come by. So it's not always easy the day of or the day before to find a replacement. Are you budgeting for that or thinking about that?
No, we've been budgeting for talent, of course, to come with their backup the day of, and then when everyone comes and everything's fine, then the talent's released and we pay everybody a session fee. But for crew, no. And we haven't run into problems until this last time when there was just this huge outbreak of it, and then we had enough time, like Louise said, to change things around, and now we have even more time because we couldn't change people. But yeah, I think that's an interesting question, right? Like, I know in Canada for a while, if I'm right, they were paying crews to be on hold for backup. when this first pandemic started. But that would be, I think, a really expensive ask for clients of any nature, even big clients. So I don't know, maybe Peter has been doing that, but we have not been doing that.
We haven't been. It hasn't been anything we've capable of doing. Our strategy is all this preemptive testing and just kind of making sure that we're in the best position ahead of time, that it won't really happen. And thankfully, we've been good that it's getting caught ahead of time. We've had a few instances where the rapid day of has tested positive. And like Louise was saying, it's kind of a judgment call. Then you test them again, you see how that does. And then a lot of times we'll send them or get a concierge to come and do like a PCR to see whether or not they're going to stay. We've replaced people day of. It's just kind of a case by case, but we don't hold entire backup crews or talent or anything like that. There's no budget in there for that.
So what if you guys are traveling for a shoot and an assistant or a stylist or somebody tests positive, and now they have to quarantine and they can't get home, they can't drive home, they've got to wait their 5 or 10 days in order to get on a plane or however it is they're going to get home. Arielle, have you had, or anyone have had any experience with this, and who pays for that quarantine time, right? It wasn't budgeted for. Has anyone here had that experience? Have you, Arielle?
Luckily, I haven't, like, knock on wood, as Patrick said, but or Peter, sorry. Yeah, we haven't had that situation. I mean, most of the time, we've been shooting since the pandemic in New York, LA, San Francisco, Miami, but, we haven't had that situation. I think with, if that were the case, I think that's part of the production, in my opinion, but, I think that should get billed back to the client. I think that's like, if you're choosing to shoot during a pandemic, that's like part of the cost. But we haven't had to.
Yeah, Emilie, you're nodding your head. You feel like from a legal standpoint that it would be the client's cost?
Well, I think it depends on what the terms say, because it will depend on, what's been agreed upon. I think that if it's not laid out in something that's been agreed upon, it would be hard to make the, both sides are going to argue that they're not responsible for it. So it's really important that all of the COVID addendums and COVID terms are updated to make sure that that's, I had a call yesterday with a client in Norway that is hiring an artist, and they're very concerned that if he gets COVID when he gets there, that they're going to have to pay for his expenses and whatever, time. And I was like, yes, this is the risk. If you would like to work with this artist who is coming from a different country to your country, and we'd love to work with you, but this is what it is. The cost will have to get covered. Of course, we can also agree to facilitate to make sure that the artist make best efforts to quarantine either before or make sure that they don't, get COVID. But if it happens, it happens. This is shooting during COVID. So often it's really very important to make sure that your terms kind of specify every different type of scenario, whether it's a multiple day shoot or a 1-day shoot. If the director, the photographer gets COVID in the middle of a 5-day shoot, will you have to replace them? Do you want to remove that obligation to replace them? Or will they still get the fees for at least the shoot time, the time that they were on set? That's how I write my terms, that it will be pro rata. So if they shot 3 full days, they will get paid those 3 days out of the 5. Or if, I had a shoot over break where it was a 5-day shoot and the photographer tested positive at 1:00 on the first day. It was like she was pulled, they were pulled from set, and eventually, we negotiated again pro rata rates, which is what the terms had said, which is great because it meant that she was paid for her prep days, her travel days, and at least the 1 shoot day, which is the work that she performed. Now, arguably, did they get any work out of that? Did the client receive any imagery? I don't know. And that again is the risk. So it's really important that that's kind of hashed out with the client beforehand. If they choose not to take on that risk, and your artist still wants to take on the job, they want to risk paying for half the expenses or all of the expenses. It should just be discussed beforehand so you can make sure it's included.
So what happens when the photographer tests positive? I'm gonna pass that to Arielle.
I mean, I guess it depends on when the photographer tests positive. Obviously with the new CDC rules, like, you know, backing out, you know, there are 5 days and, you know, if they're symptomatic or non-symptomatic, like, I feel like that's a loaded question. But, you know, I think that's, you know, just a discussion of talking with the client, like, is there a backup photographer you want to bring on? Like, if it happens on a shoot, like, is that something the first assistant could carry out the day? Like, depending on the exposure, if, you know, the photographer hasn't exposed everybody else. But I mean, I think having a backup photographer, like, in the wings is always helpful. You know, in situations, especially surrounding travel, having somebody else who can jump on. You know, for us, that's something that we've been kind of dealing with in real time, but which I think a lot of people have been. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of all case dependent, depending on the amount of days.
Yeah, and it's been interesting. I think that this new year, with the way in which the CDC has shifted the guidelines from 5 to 10 days, kind of threw everybody for a little bit of a loop. Louise, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of, like, if you have a photographer that tests positive on a PCR 7 days before for a shoot, what does that look like for your team?
Well, I haven't run into that, but what we have run into and have taken care of is if the photographer tests positive, we can set them up with a remote so that they can direct and their assistant can shoot. And we've actually even had, and this was unrelated to COVID, had to do with a volcano, had a photographer on the other side of the world, basically, who could, you know, press the button from France for a shoot in LA because they couldn't travel and nobody else could really do it. I mean, there's so much technology. Obviously it's not going to work for every shoot, but it's definitely something that we like to be able to do. And the other thing that I have, though it's certainly never our call as production, is have the conversation at a time with clients and with agents also about, you know, just in case, is there somebody that you're thinking about that might kind of step in if need be? So.
Yeah. Peter, for Estée, are they, or have they aligned at this point with the 5-day quarantine? What does that look like for you, or is that not come up yet, so you haven't had to deal with it? Just curious about.
We haven't switched away from 10-day at this point. We're still on 10-day. I don't foresee us going to the 5-day based on how strict everything has been. We're not really ones to gamble on that. So that's probably going to stay strong. And we would require, if they had tested positive previously, to let us know, and we would replace anyone on the shoot if it was within that time period that they had. In terms of testing positive, like during a shoot, we would definitely put that shoot on pause for at least a day to regroup, to see if we could replace, but likely, and this has happened only twice for us, that we've just ended up canceling and pushing things out.
Interesting.
Is that because you want to work with the artist that you hired, or is it just because it's easier not to pull somebody, or you can't replace somebody that quickly?
It's more working with the artists that have been hired, because they, for us at least, they've very specifically come in.
Right.
And our creatives are very tied to them. So that's why it happens.
Right. That's great. I do have language that you can also add in language in terms that kind of allows, it looks like you're, you know, obviously Estée takes that into account, but in COVID terms, I have seen, you know, agencies add in language that states that in the event that, you know, the photographer is replaced because of COVID, that the client will agree to rebook them on another project within the next 6 months. Or if the shoot doesn't go forward at all, that the shoot will be rebooked with this artist within the next 6 months. So they don't, it's not canceled and then you move on to a different artist when the artist recovers.
We've had a couple of interesting shoots within our organization where both for clients as well as some of our artists, in order to come out of their quarantine, have had to have negative rapid antigen tests, because our understanding is that they indicate whether or not there is they're actively infectious. And so that's one way in which we've, prior to Christmas, had clients that had tested positive on a PCR and then wanting to come back, hadn't been able to come back on set to observe the shoot with a negative antigen. Has anyone else had those policies? I know, Dawn, your healthcare, if someone tests positive for a PCR, is it 10 days and then an antigen, or just the 10 days?
We've been following, like Peter, I don't think we'll go down to 5 days anytime soon. If we do, I'd be very surprised. And what we're doing is 10 days symptom free. So we're taking everybody's word for it. And just speaking even from personal experience, like people on antigens can be positive for a very long time, and PCRs for even longer. So we're following the rules of the no symptoms, and that you need a doctor's note if you're talent or your agency, or to make a client to say that you've been symptom free for 10 days, which is not easy to get. Yeah. So, but like, I think everyone's following, like when you send your kids back to school after 10 days of quarantine, like the school's not testing them, or at least my kids, for 3 months, right? So it's assuming that like the rules, I guess, are always still like Louise said, it's like we're all reading newspaper articles and Googling like what's the new variants and how long, and I think it's every day just like making conscious decisions to try. But yeah, we're doing the 10 days, and then you have to be symptom free and have a doctor's note that from your PCR you've been symptom free for 10 days.
We have a poll around this as well that I'm going to launch, so that everyone in the audience, we'd love to have you guys weigh in too, whether you've shifted to the 5-day quarantine or you're sticking with the 10, or maybe you're doing something different.
So here's a question. When it's time to shut down a set, like literally shut down the whole set, does it matter financially? Like, does it matter who calls it to determine financial responsibility? Like, does it have to be the client that calls it? Does it have to be the photographer that calls it? Or is it just a joint thing and everybody kind of knows the drill, and now here we are trying to figure out who owes what money? How about you, Dawn? I feel like on a healthcare set, you probably will have the most stringent.
So it only happened one time at the agency, honestly, with like all the producers and COVID, and it happened recently, like everybody's saying, and someone tested positive and on a rapid, and then they tested positive again, and then they had like Louise said, a concierge came and did the PCR and it was positive, and while they were waiting, everybody had to go into like different areas outside, and it was the client's decision. The client was the one that this is how much it's going to cost to lose the entire day, and they were the ones that pulled the plug, because you just really do never know. And this person had contact with all of the people on set, basically, because it was an important person and they had a big role. So the client made the decision, and the client will pay then.
And
but that's
Emily,
one.
Say that, yeah, there's only one.
Yeah.
Emily, would this fall under force majeure?
So it depends on how your force majeure terms are drafted. I think it's better since it's all happening, to have this like clearly laid out as any kind of COVID-19 event, and you can define that pretty broadly. So if it's like the client decides to cancel the shoot because somebody else got COVID, or because a creative director got COVID, but the photographer didn't, they're still protected under force majeure, which can be whatever really is up to your agency. So it can be 50% of the fee plus expenses, or it can be 100%. Some agencies handle force majeure differently than others. So yes, but for the most part, I think it's fair to treat COVID-19 the same way an agency would treat their force majeure provisions. Because if a shoot isn't happening because of weather, the client shouldn't have to pay more because the shoot isn't happening because of COVID. Unless the artist started performing the work, right, and got COVID 2 days into a 5-day shoot, then they should get paid for the work that they performed. but for the most part, it is treated very similarly to force majeure in most instances. It's
And
not
how
automatic.
about, Louise, what is your experience or have you had an experience having to cancel a shoot? I should start with.
Yeah, the only experience that we had was actually like March 13th of 2020 when everything shut down, and we had done one day of shooting and we're coming back in to do another day. And the client finally pulled the plug at midnight. And they actually went back and forth all evening, and it's kind of a funny celebrity talent. And they basically we're waiting for the celebrity to kind of get it from the celebrity that they didn't want to shoot. And, that I guess has to do with whatever that talent contract was. But in the end, to answer your question, it was the client. And since it was so early on, though, as fabulous as these clients are, and they really are and have always been really good to us, there was some, pulling about getting all the money because there was nothing really laid out about. There were no rules. It was just everyone doing what they think was right. And of course, as weeks go on, as the landscape is changing, how the clients see, what your loss should be or why they should compensate people for stuff, that changes. And that's why I think it's just really important if we can kind of develop this like just really clear set of guidelines so that we don't have to be hoping that,
Negotiating it differently every time.
Yeah, it's just too much. It's like, talk about like producing. It's endless negotiating.
Peter and Dawn, sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
I was just gonna make a plug for the template terms and conditions on the AMA website for AMA members. There are some wonderful samples of COVID terms as well. So please check out our website under, I believe it's under bidding resources.
Yeah.
Yes, Ashley, if you can throw them in the chat for our AMA members, they can give you guys some good ideas for when you're developing your own COVID cancellation terms, because it does sound important.
Along those lines, I feel like I'm negotiating every job differently and separately, and the stakes are so high right now. Every single time I'm on a job and we're reviewing these terms and conditions. My questions are for Peter and for Dawn, and I'd love to have both of you answer this. Do you find that the majority of requests to negotiate with you in regards to the terms, is it pretty consistent what people are asking for? Or are you finding that some people want to pay their crew 50%, some people require 100%? And I think people out there are just trying to get a sense of what is a realistic contract to negotiate, and some people are just realizing, oh, I have to start paying attention to this stuff. This is important. So what are the things that kind of rise to the top for you that you're seeing people negotiate?
For us, it's really been kind of case by case. There hasn't been one kind of common theme. The most common theme being that people want 100% of what they've been booked for in the cancellation case. And I don't really fight that. Our terms are very similar to what Emilie was describing, they're kind of preset in the agreements and they're in there. And so we're negotiating from that, which is very helpful. So, they're kind of set cancellations and percentages, and we kind of go from there and back and forth and work what works best for all parties. What we can all agree on, that is. And I personally, as a producer, don't mess with COVID. I'm very reasonable about it. And I think that people deserve to be, protected in what they're getting. And if you're booked, then you're booked. And I treat it mostly like a normal cancellation, and I don't try to go away from that.
Would you say the same thing for you, Dawn?
Yeah, it is a case by case basis, but like a postponement, I'm still, and we postponed and canceled a day, but we're still compensating the photographer because it wasn't their fault of the postponement. They had nothing to do with it. But yeah, we're not, if you cancel a shoot, it's still in the terms and agreements, right? We're all following. For me, it's different client, like our client agreements are different. So if I'm working with one pharma company versus another, the agency client agreements are different. So sometimes the purchase orders will be slightly different, but if you're canceling a shoot a couple of days out, whether it's COVID or whatever it is, you're gonna pay.
Arielle, I'm just be curious to hear if you've had clients cancel on you and if there's been different terms depending on the client.
Yeah, I mean, we've been pretty fortunate. I think we had at the beginning of COVID, one of our shoots canceled. It was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks out, but obviously everything had shut down. And we just billed them for it was like, I think 50% of everybody's rate and incurred costs thus far. I mean, that was at the very beginning. We haven't had another shoot cancel since then due to COVID. So we've been pretty fortunate in that sense. So I don't know, I can't really speak to that.
Heather, I'm going to ask you this question as a rep, not a board member. Have you had to cancel shoots? Have clients asked for credits? How have you managed that within your organization?
We have had one shoot cancel, and it was in December a year ago. And it came from the client. They chose, the producer was exposed or tested positive, and the photographer was exposed. And at this point, nobody had been vaccinated. So everyone, was pretty nervous, and they pulled the plug. And we arranged a postponement for them. At that point, we had given them 6 months to postpone. I think nowadays I'm more in the 3-month camp for postponement. And we charged them 100% of the photographer's fees. And when we reshot, we credited them back 50%. So it kept that cancellation postponement conversation out of it, because we were always concerned that anything could happen in those 6 months and they could decide not to proceed. And then I'm going to have to go back to them and try and get that money for the actual cancellation. So we treated it as a cancellation and then said, if you rebook, we'll give you 50% back of the photographer's fees. But I mean, everybody was there on set. So it was 100% of everything. And we, not all the
I just want to clarify, you didn't get them 100, you didn't get them 50% back. You just credited them. So
we credited them. Yes.
So you
sorry.
charged 150 total percent, not 200%.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Just the photographer's fees. They didn't get
Just
any
the
credit.
Correct.
And then
Because everyone else had been booked and was on set and ready to shoot. So does that answer your question?
It totally answers my question. I know personally for my organization, I've had a lot of COVID indemnity clauses that have come along with my contracts. And, I think, Emilie, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about generally what to watch out for on contracts in that way. And I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat too, from various people asking about like these waivers that people are asked to be signed. I've heard before that they're actually not even legal. Just sort of what your experience has been and how you would advise clients in terms of signing a waiver that says like, I accept responsibility for shooting during a pandemic. And
I mean, I can't like speak to the legality of a document unless I see it. I think it really depends, but I know that you can't like legally waive certain things that some people are asking you to waive. It doesn't mean that the waiver is illegal, but sometimes like even if you assign something, you can't legally waive your right to like health, but you can take an assumption of the risk. So a lot of them are assumption of the risk waivers now. It's like initially people were not consulting with lawyers and they made them and then they did. And now they're assumption of the risk waivers, which are okay to sign. They're legal to sign and they're very, very common. So there's not a lot of changes that we can make to those when we receive them. And I think vice versa, if you are producing a shoot, it's very smart to send assumption of the risk waivers to everybody that's on set, including the people on your own team. And then when it comes to COVID addendums, they're really variant. I mean, it really very much depends, but it should match whatever your terms and conditions are to as much as possible. And it really depends, you know, it depends on the job. Are you willing to take certain risks? I would say the most important thing is to ensure that costs are covered, because while cancellation terms are in place now in all of our terms already for any other reason, what makes COVID different than cancellation for any other reason is that there's expenses incurred after COVID happens, like ongoing testing, potential hotel accommodations, meals, and none of that is accounted for in standard cancellation terms. So without that language, it can fall, there will be an argument inevitably between who will be responsible for those. So, you know, addendums usually address these extra costs. So it's important to decide then whether you'd like to take on those costs in the event that happens, or the client should take on those costs. You know, I represent artists, so I always try and move those onto the client as much as possible, because they are the ones commissioning the shoot, and the artists are the ones taking their risk by shooting for them during a pandemic. So I think, like, especially if it's a job on location, travel costs should be covered in the event that the shoot is canceled, or if the photographer or director gets COVID on set and has to quarantine for 10 days in that country, then the client should have to pay for those hotel accommodations. Often COVID addendums address these expenses. So it's an opportunity for you to kind of shift a lot of that, pay for some of it, split it, you know, come up to some sort of agreement. You can do whatever you want. But oftentimes they'll say no changes can be made, right? So you kind of have to take it or leave it. And then you decide if you want to take the job and take that risk or not.
Louise, for your packets that go out to your crews and what have you, do you guys have a waiver that goes through?
We have a waiver. We have a waiver that's included. We honestly never know whether that's just some kind of, that it would, we didn't know if it would really stand up to anything, but just some, honestly, just some ass covering that just gets passed along. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
That should be the new name for the firm. Not Creative Counsel, ass cover.
Arielle, I assume, do you have that same sort of thing as well?
Yeah, we actually early on created an assumption of risk form. I have a attorney I work with who kind of specializes in a lot of COVID rules and regulations, and they helped draft it. And I think at the beginning, it was a little bit of a gray area. And I know some people had ones that were saying like, you can't sue us, blah, 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 like if you get COVID. And I'm like, well, you can't guarantee that, like, you know, like you can't tell somebody in advance that they can't sue you. But yeah, we've had that from the beginning. It's changed a little bit, like over the time of COVID, but we do have something to make everybody sign that just says, you know, if you have symptoms, you won't come to set and all that kind of stuff. So
you can have people agree not to sue you.
Great.
That's fine.
Fun time.
Go for it.
And I suppose one of the questions, I know Louise, you and I kind of chatted about this offline before. When you're working and managing a production on behalf of an artist agent like myself, do you agree on the terms beforehand? Are the agents always transparent with you in terms of what it is that they've signed with the agency in terms of COVID indemnification or just indemnification clauses in general?
For the most part, I would have to say, well, there are a couple of things. We do try to get our own direct POs with agencies whenever we can for expenses. And that is one of the things, because I know for some of you reps, that doesn't work for you. So in terms of, do we really know what the reps have signed? No, and it's not for any other reason, I imagine. It's just that it's, until very recently, we hadn't thought about it so much. You know, yes, I would see the terms and conditions, but it was always pretty standard stuff, and now it's not. The other thing is that since we're not directly contracting with the agency or the client, if that's the case, I think legally it becomes cloudier, you know, if things go wrong for whatever reason, like what that chain is. We don't really have, I don't think as much of a legal leg to stand on. I mean, Emilie, I guess you can tell me whether that's true, but you need to go through like another step, because you're not the contractor.
Well, to that end, you should also, if you are the artist, make sure that within your terms, there's language that says that, the client will indemnify you and you are not in breach in the event that you get COVID or your artist gets COVID and can't go on with the shoot. Because there is a situation, a nightmare situation, where the one person who gets COVID is the photographer, and the client sues the photographer for all of those expenses that are incurred as a result of having to cancel the shoot because they were not able to perform. So it's always, I don't want to.
You just gave me a panic attack.
I don't want to scare anyone, but it's always good. That's also what I'm here for, I guess, to scare you a little bit, but like, it's just good to have language, which I also always include, that that the client, that the artist and the agency as well separately are both, the client will indemnify both in the event that the artist gets sick, so they will be held harmless. And it's not a breach of the agreement, basically, because there is an agreement that we will provide for services.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't provide those services and they can make the argument that it's because there was this COVID. Yeah, so it's always good to try and do it in the reverse as well, and just, prevent any kind of issues.
And Dawn, I see you shaking your head. Those are the types of agreements that you have.
Yeah, and I agree with Louise. I usually cut the purchase order to the producer, because on the indemnifications for FCB, at least, they're taking responsibility for the set, saying they're going to do everything they can to keep a safe set. An agency and client will do everything they can, and we're going to hold each party harmless, basically. So if you send it to the artist, if I send it to Heather and she signs it, it's Heather Elder, but Heather's not on the set, right? So she's not really controlling all the COVID testing. And so we've been cutting purchase orders directly to the producers, and I send those even sometimes at bidding, producers will ask to see them, which I think is great because they know what they're in for even when we're starting the bidding process.
Yeah.
And it says that everybody will follow the mitigation and COVID standards and best to their ability, and hold each party, harmless of damages, as
But
long as
basically you'll both walk away.
exactly.
Like,
Yep.
right.
Yeah, it's mutual.
And
And
that's ideal, but it's not like the default.
Right. And this addendum took a very long time for FCB to work through. There were lots of edits. It was changed. It was and most producers are signing. I mean, Louise, you've probably had one from FCB. I know you shot with us a couple of times. I mean, it's pretty good. It's took a long time to get there, but nobody's been fighting us back or crossing out or having conversations. So, but yeah, I like to send them to the producer, and like everybody should, walk away harmless.
Another quick plug for the AMA website. We do also have a rep and producer agreement as well on our website. So that way, if an artist agent is in handling the PO on behalf of a producer, we have a template that you can use to help clarify the terms of your business arrangement, which can always be helpful as well.
So before we get into the client or the chat and questions that you guys might have, I'm just wondering about conversations that are happening out there with clients right now. What are your clients worried about? What are they asking you? Anything new that we haven't touched on already? As we go into 2022, is there anything you can tell the people who are listening? Here are the trends and the things that I think my clients are going to be, things they're concerned about maybe going forward. Dawn, do you want to start? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. I'm always nervous a kid is going to come flying, and I'm sure a lot of people have the same concern. But I think that the testing prior has to happen for everyone, right? Clients included. So I think that's been a big thing for us. It's a constant conversation now. And we are talking about the 5 versus the 10 day as far as like everyone. Schools just changed in my area for the kids to go back after 5 days. So I think that's right now what's coming up. But I think the conversation is the prior to the travel is how many hours, you know, you could take a COVID test on a Saturday morning and it's negative, and then take a PCR test on a Sunday morning and it's positive, right? So we're still doing every 72 hours, everyone has to be tested, and every single person, client included, has to be tested before they fly or travel. I think that's still like a conversation, and maybe even the rapid PCRs on every set every single day is a big conversation right now that we're having, because of this. If we want to work through this surge, what is the best way to work through this surge?
And how about you, Peter? What are your internal conversations with your teams?
We basically are doing the same. We're amping back up into just like really stringent testing for everyone who's going to be there, the 72-hour period, the daily testing when we're actually shooting. It's, you know, even when we shoots in December, even with all of that, it's still things like bled through, and on the third day of a shoot someone tested positive and we had to go like it's an unfortunate reality, and you just kind of walk from there. And we've been focusing on just making sure we have everything ducks in a row, and then having conversation if it happens. And
are people at your place nervous about testing? I mean, not testing, I'm sorry, shooting? Is there conversations like, maybe let's push pause for a while, or, you know, let's see what happens after the surge, or, you know, is it still full ahead?
It's still full steam ahead. People are, I mean, we have had conversations about it, and we definitely have kind of shifted to having some remote overseeing from art directors and things like that who have felt uncomfortable in the past couple of weeks. And thankfully we're kind of in a situation where we've already done that, so it's easy to kind of step back into it, even though it's not ideal. We definitely listen to comfort levels as we're walking forward, but it's an individual conversation every time.
Great. Louise or Arielle, have either of you heard rumblings in the background? Are things being pushed, or is people still interested in shooting? I think I want everybody listening to hear that,
Well,
no, it's okay, we're gonna be fine. We're still trying, we're still doing this.
Well, we were just awarded a job last week, and they said we're moving forward, but because of COVID, they've decided to push, and we gave them multiple calendars, and we wanted them to push. Not that we wanted, you know, to wait to do the work, but we were nervous. It's a big job. It's a lot of talent. It's a big crew, multiple days. So, you know, you're weighing this like thing, and they've decided to push out a few weeks and just kind of let things calm down. That's in Los Angeles. I mean, the downside is that when they push out too far, well, we're missing other work that we could be doing because we were holding the time. I mean, we're not expecting anybody in this case to be responsible for, you know, we hadn't started booking anything. The job hadn't been officially awarded yet. We're still discussing calendar. But the reality is that it was supposed to shoot 2 weeks earlier. Now we're going to wait 2 weeks. So that's 2 weeks that, you know, maybe we would have done something else. But hey, that's also part of what's happening right now, and you can't have it always. So that's my experience.
We've been forging ahead, shooting. And I think as far as I'm concerned, a lot of my clients have been still on board to shoot, but we have been ramping up testing. Some of our clients aren't used to like the daily antigen testing. I think it's a necessity, and I'll push for it. I just pushed for it on a shoot and the client approved it. So super happy. But yeah, I think, you know, PCR testing across the board for everybody in advance, and additionally antigen testing daily for every single person. I think that's kind of our gold standard, what we're putting forward with all of our shoots for right now, just to, you know, make sure everybody's safe. But yeah.
I really appreciate everyone giving us the time on this panel. If you guys can stay on a little bit longer, we do have a lot of questions in the chat that we also want to answer. And then I really want to encourage anyone from the audience to raise their hand and to join the conversation, share your experience, ask your question as well. So I'm going to try to go through some of the questions in the chat, but feel free to interrupt me with the people raising hands. The first question is a great question from Courtney Williams. just talking about how she's having a really hard time getting testing. She's in Dallas. And I know that we have everyone represented here from New York and LA. And Dawn, remind me where you're at again?
In Chicago.
In Chicago.
It's
Same?
horrible. Yeah, in New York it's terrible. I'm having, I think before we started, I was saying we're FedExing, producer was FedExing. You cannot get a test here for weeks at a time. And I tested last week and I think I waited 3 hours in my car to get a test. And then it was a 7-day turnaround because they were so short-staffed at the lab to read the testing. And I would have missed my shoot if we didn't postpone it. Because, you know, I had to do it in 72 hours and they didn't give me the results in 72 hours. So it's a problem. Yeah, it's a problem that needs to like definitely figure out a way to solve it. I think everywhere across the country, testing is so limited.
Peter, for Estée, do you guys have tests stockpiled as a company, or are you contracting with a concierge service? How are you guys handling? Because it sounds like you've been doing the antigen test too all along.
Yeah, thankfully we partner with a studio in the city that we did a stockpile there. So a lot of our shooting that we're doing, we have those for the day-to-day, but we have been running into issues with the PCR and the wait times and labs not kind of cycling through. And so it means that I've at least kind of been getting on top of people doing it like way earlier and then trying again. And it's just constantly throwing tests at people essentially.
Yeah. Arielle, how do you plan for that on your productions?
Yeah, I mean, we have, like Louise was saying, we have a concierge company that we've been working with. We have a couple, but they've been pretty great with testing. Something that's come out recently is there's like these home PCR tests. There's a company called Q. We just purchased one as well, they're molecular tests, but they're similar to PCRs. And you know, you can buy tests and have everybody come by and do those. I think in like Dallas where Courtney's at, you know, maybe that's a solve to be able to do some of those molecular tests.
Our company will not accept those.
Oh, really?
No, it has to be lab based. Yeah, because we've had lots of.
Well, there's a version that has that you have like a medic that like can FaceTime with you essentially.
Scan one, yeah. Yeah, no, that's the problem because a lot of photographers are going and getting these tests, the same exact that you're talking about, and we're sending them to the nurse. Yeah, but they're not accepted. I think you have to get a lab-based PCR test with a lot of agencies require. It's almost, yeah, there has to be another solve. But like you said, the concierges are the best. It's the best thing to do, but they're so expensive. To send somebody to everyone's house is costs a lot.
Yeah, we've done it. Yeah.
The other way, I'm not sure if you guys all know this, and I'm sorry, but in addition to sending somebody to someone's house, you just set up at a location for the day or for 2 days, so your crew has options and you have everybody go to that location. And then that way you're working with a private testing company, you can guarantee that the results are back in time. That's kind of the way we've been doing it for crew. Anyway.
There's a question in the chat too, where if someone shows up on a crew member specifically shows up to work and then tests positive for that day, do you pay them for the work or are they just released and sent home?
We pay them. Yeah.
We pay them.
You pay them. That's great. Let's see. We talked about that. Just making sure I get it.
That same day health is a great resource if that helps for anybody.
Do you guys have same day health in New York? I know we have it out here in LA. Yeah, great.
Yeah, we've used it in both LA and New York. It's been great.
And then someone else asked us, this is such a great panel. Thank you. You're welcome. I would like to clarify, can you legally require that talent and crew be vaccinated to attend the shoot? For anyone who joined this late, Emilie, do you just want to reiterate those points for us?
Sure. And somebody else asked above something related, so it's a good opportunity to answer that too. Yes, you can ask, and clients can ask you to send vax cards for your artist, as long as, you know, they're kept confidential. You as the producer, you as the agency, whoever's booking the crew members can ask for vaccination cards. You can also require everybody on set to be vaccinated. You have a lot of protection there in the eyes of the law. But as so long as you keep all of that information confidential. And somebody asked what the best practices are to keep that information confidential. And the best way to do that is to assign one person to collect the information as the COVID designee for, you know, either having somebody on set or on the production side of things, on the internal pre-production side of things, that collects all that information, saves it in a folder that is locked and is basically limited to 1 or 2 people on the pre-pro side who has that information. And that's what I would say the best practice is. And to make sure that, you know, in case anybody asks of anybody else's status, you do not answer, but you can say it's an all vaccinated set. Everybody has to be vaccinated.
There's another really great question that's about, we all know the safe way to go about with testing. And that testing is an important component to making sure that we don't have COVID on set. But what do you do when the client is not willing to cover the costs? Now I know for Don and Peter, that just probably breaks your brain because you're like, what? Of course, you cover the costs. You guys are the shining examples. I know.
To add to that, you bid a job in December when you didn't know this is all happening in one way, and now things have changed and you have overages that need to be, not overages, but additional expenses that need to be covered, and a client who's resistant to that. Does anyone have advice beyond, you know, cover it yourself, walk away? Like what is it that you do in that situation?
I can answer this as a rep for my organization. We had a project that was where the brand was going to produce it, and they had promised that they would have testing on set. And we bid the job in December. I think it was in December. We started bidding in December and approved in January. And then we found out the weekend before the shoot was to start on Monday that the brand had not actually procured the testing. They couldn't find testing services because of the shortage. And we told them that we were going to pull out of the shoot if they couldn't figure it out. We said that we would help them find testing, that we could work it out with our concierge services, but if they didn't have testing, that we wouldn't do it. It's hard. It's hard. The artist needed the work. It's hard to put your foot down. But we really felt like it was an important thing to do. And thankfully the client eventually came to their senses and got the concierge service to come and get everyone tested. But I mean, here's Louise and Arielle. Have you experienced that with clients not being willing to pay for the testing?
You know, we've had pushback. I've never had them, I haven't had anybody say that they wouldn't pay for anything. And you know, we do the advanced PCR and then we do the day of, and the fallback is going from the day of PCR as well to day of antigen. And, you know, a tiny shoot we did a few weeks ago. Actually, it was probably in November. Things felt different. So 1-day shoot, tiny. We just did on set. We didn't do PCR. And I have to say, I think it's the only shoot since the beginning of all this that we did that way, because we've been really pretty hardcore about the advanced PCR, but there was just no money, and we decided that we would do it. I don't know, was it stupid? Probably, but
November was such a different time.
Yeah, it was. It felt really different. It felt like, you know, maybe we're on the up. I don't know.
Arielle, what about you?
Yeah, I feel like, you know, at the beginning, it was kind of hard to get clients to pay for testing, but now I feel like everybody's on board with it, just for everybody's safety. Like as a company policy, we won't do a shoot without some sort of testing. I know sometimes there's like little editorials or like, you know, small things like that, but if they won't pay for testing, we just, you know, unfortunately have to turn it down. So
There's a question in the chat that asks, is there a consensus that PCR tests prior to the shoot and antigen tests on every shoot day? One thing I'll say is that we can't create a consensus here. We can give each other guidance to learn from. That is the policy that my company has shifted to PCR before and antigen every day of the shoot while we're going through this surge. And testing antigen every day is actually, to have it be every day is new for us. Peter, it sounds like that's been something that Estée has always implemented.
Every day is new. Our policy used to be first day and then every third day. And with Omicron, we've shifted to every day.
Wow, that's incredible. I am also going to have Beth, I'm gonna unmute you. I see your hand is raised. Can you let us know what your question is?
Beth, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, I didn't, there we go.
Oh,
Me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Yeah, hey, sorry, I came in a little late because I was on another call, but, and you may have already covered this, but before we were doing testing, we were doing a large project, and the agreement was that everybody had to come day prior and get their temperatures taken. And our photographer had a temperature. Has anybody had the photographer or director show up and test positive? Because he ended up not having COVID, but we had to scramble and find a replacement photographer. And that has made me just feel like I'm on pins and needles with every project, particularly large ones with so many players involved that can't easily be shoved back a few days to, anyway, I'm just wondering if anyone has had that experience and how's that dealt with? I just tell everybody to go into quarantine before a shoot, but.
We did discuss that. People gave a lot of anecdotes, and they may again. I would just say the best way to do it if it's a bigger shoot is to always have a backup, at least just for the photographer or director.
Okay.
And have them in the wings, during the course of the shoot, someone that's holding their time.
Okay, and has that been cleared with the agency? Here's our backup suggestion, and you've got that. I mean,
you don't have an obligation.
That was just the one-time experience I had.
I think it depends on the terms that you've signed, but typically, whether you have an obligation to replace the person or not. So you could work that out beforehand. But if the agency doesn't like your replacement, then they would find another. Presumably the client would find the replacement.
we'll send you the recording. We'll send you the recording so you can have a conversation around it. So there's a lot of other interesting information that you might get from it.
Thank you. Sorry about asking it again.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you for asking a question.
I know that we're really over time. I just want to thank our amazing panel. I know that we haven't been able to get to all of the questions. I feel like we could go on for at least another hour. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit longer. I don't want to keep our panel because I know everybody's work days are so crazy. If you guys can stick around more, then of course, fantastic. But thank you everyone for coming and for all of the amazing questions. Heather, are you able to stick around a little bit longer?
Yeah, I can stick around a little bit in case there's questions about this or the AMA or whatever, but until everyone goes away, why don't you and I just stick around?
Yeah, we can continue the conversation. We really appreciate it, everybody. Yeah,
it was really fun and really informative. Thank you. And nice to meet you.
I'm very hopeful in 2 weeks we'll be living back in our November days at least.
Hope so too.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone. This was great.
Thank you for
See you later.
Of course. And again, Heather and I will keep trying to work through the chat. Heather, is there any questions that I've missed?
I'm not sure.
Let's
see. Oh, hold on.
Emilie, before you go, can you?
I have 10 minutes.
Can you review again if productions need to pay freelance crew to test on their own time? Is that a requirement since you are employing them for a job?
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, I am not as familiar with the AICP rules or the if it's a union I mean, it depends on what you negotiate with the crew member, right? You can always, I would always make sure you have that conversation in advance. You can give them a stipend. I don't know that you're required to as a contractor, but if you're asking them to do something, they should, and they have the right to charge you something, so you can offer to give them some sort of stipend, even if it's like their travel costs. But they can technically charge a day rate, just like I think I use the analogy of a DIT dropping off a hard drive the following day. And however, a concierge service, if it's available to you, knowing that, they're kind of less common now because of the surge, may be less expensive. That way it doesn't incur an additional day rate, and you can kind of send a testing person their way. If it's an employee and say in your workspace, like a W-2'd person, and you're requiring everybody in your office to get tested, then you do have to compensate them to go get tested.
Yeah, a lot of times we'll find that if we're having, if an assistant has been working and they have to go after hours, after their other jobs to test, that's when we make sure to give them a stipend. But now it also,
as long as you cover, their car and the test. I mean, I would say that like that's a strong legal argument that you've given them sufficient, compensation, because you're not asking them to kind of go out of pocket for anything.
yeah, I think interestingly enough, I think so many people, I don't know, I'd be curious to know everyone else's experience with this. Heather and Arielle and Peter, I don't know if you see this as well, but a lot of these places ask, do you have health insurance? And the insurance, ends up covering. Sometimes we don't love that, because when you test via insurance, it takes longer versus us paying for the rapids.
Like the results take longer.
Yeah. So we just end up paying for the tests. And I think it also depends on the city. Arielle, have you ever seen instances where crew in a particular city wants to be, I find in San Francisco, there's a higher expectation of a stipend than in other locations.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we haven't really been paying a stipend. We haven't been asked that often, to be honest. But I think in those certain situations where somebody's like, oh, I'm on set, I can't, whatever, like we'll get the concierge, to come test them, or, or we will, pay them a stipend to go, early before their set, they're on a previous shoot. But I also think like we haven't been having anybody bill through insurance for testing. I think that's like the cost of the job. Like we should cover the test. We've been working with Same Day Health and Direct Care to do testing, and we'll pay in advance and set up a code. They can easily book online themselves, go with their convenience, between certain days, and do it that way. But we've also done it, I think Louise had mentioned before, we've done it where there's like somebody will like have a concierge testing set up at some location between the hours of whatever and whatever, and people can come by. I think that is something where you should pay somebody to come, because you're setting, like we would set the hours as opposed to somebody going at their convenience. So I think that's an instance. We haven't really done that in a while, but obviously with the surge, if that becomes an issue, we would have to bring that back.
Yeah. And Peter, is there a particular, I know you said that you have tests stockpiled at a studio, but is there specific locations that for Estée, or are you directing people to one spot? Just curious how you guys are handling that.
We have like a corporately approved testing. We also frequently use Valhalla Medics in New York City. We use Same Day Health as well. We've even directed people to like IV Drips, who have a great service for COVID testing. It's really just like whatever we can get out when we need to get it out. But that's been how we avoid day rates or stipends for testing, is we provide the concierge service because it ends up being more cost efficient for us.
IV drip is a great idea.
One thing I did want to bring up, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but with the same day testing, We've been really cognizant as of recently about who's riding with who. Like a lot of times we'll have like clients all travel in or talent all travel in, and then, you know, we're expected to pick them up. We have a PA driver, but then if they're all in a vehicle together on their way to set and somebody then tests positive, like then everybody in that vehicle has been exposed. So we've actually been doing with our daily rapids. We've had a separate rapid tester go to the hotel where everybody is and rapid test them before they all ride together, just to like get ahead of any of that issue.
Yeah, this exact thing happened to a shoot that I worked on just over the break, over Christmas, like the holiday in you know, Mexico. So everybody was like in a van and they drove to set, and one person, the photographer, had got COVID and had COVID, and everybody in the van had to leave. So it was like everybody got paid for the whole shoot, thankfully, but it's a good point to really test before they're all kind of put together.
Even with shuttling from like a crew parking lot to location, we'll set up rapid testing in the crew lot so that before people jump in the van together, they are tested.
Yeah, we mandate that as well. Before you get in any sort of like enclosed space, the testing has to happen.
Somebody was asking about quarantining before a shoot. Requiring a crew or a photographer or any key people. I mean, I remember that happening, you know, before there was vaccinations and stuff. People were self-quarantining and stuff ahead of time. But this person is saying, was there any discussion about the photographer and crew quarantining prior to shoot and how they are compensated? I'm not personally being requested that at all. Of any of you?
Yeah, we've had a couple of instances where photographers have traveled to Asia, and there's 14 at that time 14-day quarantines prior to being able to shoot. And it's crazy because there's specific hotels set up for that. They cannot leave. They have video cameras on the door watching them. And so we negotiated a fee for their quarantine, and it was
Interesting.
one of my photographers documented it on his Instagram stories, and it was really interesting to see what happens over a 14-day quarantine by yourself.
Well, it's days that they can't work, so it does make sense if the client is requesting any time, they should pay for that time, I think.
Yeah.
And Dawn, you feel like if a client were to make that request to a photographer, that would be an expectation you would set with them to also pay for that?
It wasn't well received when we first did it in August of 2020, and the photographer had to come from a hotspot, which was before vaccinations. And I mean, I was in a hotspot and got to the shoot and couldn't go as well. And we asked them to quarantine for 14 days, and the clients were like, why should we pay for that? And it's the same thing Emilie just said. We're like, we're taking him off the market. He's sitting in a hotel away from his family. And so we ended up paying for it, but it didn't go over well at first. Like, it was, you know, definitely not an easy thing. For all of us, we understand that someone's time is 14 days sitting in a hotel room, and that's 14 days they can't work on anything else. But we definitely had to do it, and we definitely paid for it, but it was only because they were coming from a hotspot. Anyone else who came from somewhere else didn't have to do it. And then I got to the shoot, and Chicago wasn't a hot spot. And then I got to New York, and by the time I got to New York, Chicago was a hot spot, and I couldn't go to the shoot. This is well before vaccinations.
It's amazing how much we've all lived in the last 2 years. Oh yes, I remember that time. It really kind of blows your mind.
And how scared you are at the beginning, right? I mean, I think Arielle was saying, like, shooting in May, June, and July, and I have a immunocompromised kid, and I always, Heather will tell you, I'll always forge ahead, but it is scary when you're going and you had no idea what you were like getting into, you know, like, we're just wearing these masks that are supposed to protect us from something that is killing people. And we've definitely lived through some crazy times. Yeah, it's amazing how we do forge ahead and pivot. I mean, from day to day, I think all of us probably on this panel have had to make some major decisions that, you know, in the beginning of December, we never thought we'd be doing it a month later. We were all getting pretty, you know, comfortable wearing masks, but again, like, feeling a little bit like we're getting to a better place. And now we're, you know, kind of figuring it all out again.
Yeah, we've also been expected to manage everybody's panic. Like, I think at the beginning of COVID, like, we're shooting kids, and I would get phone calls like at midnight from moms freaking out about COVID. And I'm like, don't do the shoot then. Like, I don't know, and like I said, like, we're doctors, we're lawyers, we're therapists, we're, everything. And it's, I've definitely learned a lot. So it's been an
It's also
adventure.
scary when people turn to you and are asking these health questions and legal questions. I mean, Emilie obviously is very versed in this, but like I wasn't, I'm like, I'm just a producer. Like, I don't know if you have a fever and your throat hurts. And like, I'm like, I have enough time managing my own people in my house. Like like Arielle said, I would just like, then don't sign up for this, because there's no way I can predict if you have it, if somebody on the set's going to have it, if your kid's going to get it. And I think that's the thing. I think the hats that we've all had to wear, the articles that I now read at night are about like illnesses instead of like, looking at clothes or, I mean, it's crazy things, right? Like I'm reading the WHO and the CDC and I'm like, this is, and then you're laying in bed at night and you're like, is the shoe going to go okay? Somebody going to get it. Somebody gets it on the plane. Or the person next to them, like, you're sitting next to somebody on the plane that like coughs and you're like, do you have like, I like, don't breathe on me. Stop breathing. It's become pretty crazy, but everybody turns to everybody like us who is like, the wedding planner of everything. And, I always like, I just was like, I don't even have words for it. I guess everybody turns to us for all of the questions, and it's definitely an interesting role. Our jobs have morphed over the last 2 years into something that we could have never expected.
Yeah, my favorite was a mom calling me being like, how are you going to guarantee that we don't get COVID on set? And I was like, I can't guarantee any of that. I can't guarantee that the gas handle on your way to set that you're filling your tank with doesn't have COVID on it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I've had a couple of those. Yeah. Everybody emails the producer. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to wake up with COVID. I'm like, I'm Lysoling my groceries right now. Like, I have no idea.
I was just going to say, I'm glad that there are so many terms that are so great already that we already have that we just kind of assumed would never be activated in terms of like cancellation terms and things like that. Of course, we have to expand on them now, but for the most part, like productions agencies at this level, we've all been really kind of covered with those terms that we never really looked at before, and now they're being activated. And, I had a situation where a photographer got COVID on set, and they were then quarantining in a hotel on location, paid for by the client, and then 2 days later tested negative. So, it was a very short stint of COVID, thankfully. But because it was, the client basically accused the photographer of coming to set with COVID because they didn't have it for long enough. So they weren't going to pay the fee and infecting everybody else because the whole shoot got canceled. I mean, and the amount of shoots I've worked on with people who have had COVID, I think I've had like 10 in the past month. And so if it wasn't for the terms that said it doesn't matter if there's COVID situation, this is how it's going to be handled, not the fault of who is, let's not get into that. And the terms are pretty straightforward when it comes to a COVID situation happening regardless. So it's, just to go back to that, it's really good to have them kind of black and white because regardless of what the emotional situation is at the time, everybody will have heightened emotions. You'll use the terms to guide you. So good to beforehand.
Yeah, that is really good advice. Yeah, to have that laid out, especially considering the current surge.
Yeah, I love our terms. I read them every week, make sure I'm up to date on them, constantly just falling back on them. Happy they're there.
Lawyer. I love William Jelinek.
He's amazing. I ask him questions all the time. He's like a wonderful dad.
He's great.
I think we were actually able to answer everyone's questions in the chat. Thank you again to our panel. Thank you to everyone for coming and asking questions. This has been an amazing conversation. I hope everyone walks away from this conversation with some ideas of how they might handle their set should there be a cancellation or a COVID exposure, and is feeling inspired to read their own COVID terms. I know there was a little bit of confusion in the chat. The AMA terms and conditions under section 11 does have a COVID provision. So Please feel free to use that as a template to draft your own COVID terms, and reach out if you have any questions or just want someone to bounce some ideas off of. I know all the board members are happy to engage in those conversations as well. So thank you again, everyone. Super
Thank you
helpful.
so much, you guys. Thank you. Thank you.
For having us.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Lauder.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.